The morning I watched Karren Braddock storm across her pristine lawn toward my snow-covered driveway, I knew this winter in Duluth, Minnesota, was about to get a whole lot more interesting. I had just finished attaching my plow blade to my Ford F-250, ready to clear out my driveway after the blizzard that had dumped nearly 2 feet of snow overnight. The temperature was hovering around -5 degrees, and my breath came out in thick white clouds as I worked. I am Derek Kline, and I had moved into Pinewood Estates exactly 6 months ago, thinking this quiet suburban neighborhood would be the perfect place to settle down after my divorce. What I had not counted on was the homeowners association being run by a woman who treated the neighborhood bylaws like they were the 10 Commandments carved in stone. Karren was wearing a white puffy coat that made her look like the Michelin Man, paired with designer boots that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage payment. Her blonde hair was pulled back so tight I wondered if it was giving her a headache, and even from 50 feet away, I could see the angry flush creeping up her cheeks. "Derek Kline," she shouted, marching straight through the snow bank that separated our properties. "We need to talk. Right now." I straightened up from checking the plow attachment and wiped my gloved hands on my jeans. "Morning, Karren. What can I do for you?" She planted herself directly in front of me, hands on her hips, looking like she was about to explode. "I saw you getting your plow ready, and I want to make something very clear. Your property line ends at the fence, and when you clear your driveway, I better not see one single flake of snow pushed onto my property. Do you understand me?" I blinked at her. "Karren, I am just clearing my own driveway. I have not even started yet." "I know how you men are with these plows," she said, her voice dripping with condescension. "You get all excited with your big trucks and your equipment, and you do not pay attention to property lines." "Well, not in my neighborhood. I am the HOA president, and I will be watching." The thing about Karren Braddock was that she had been HOA president for 7 years running. No one else wanted the job, mainly because it paid nothing and came with the responsibility of dealing with people's petty complaints. But Karren loved it. She loved the power, the authority, the ability to fine people for leaving their garbage cans out too long or painting their mailbox the wrong shade of white. "I will be careful," I said, trying to keep my tone neutral. The last thing I wanted was to start a war with the HOA president in the middle of winter. "See that you are," she snapped. Then her expression changed slightly, morphing into something that I guess she thought was charming. "Actually, since you are doing your driveway anyway, you should do mine too. It only makes sense. We are neighbors after all." I stared at her for a long moment, waiting for the punchline. When none came, I realized she was serious. "You want me to plow your driveway?" "Well, yes," she said, like it was the most obvious thing in the world. "You already have the equipment out. It would only take you a few extra minutes. And as HOA president, I think it is important that the neighborhood see us working together, setting a good example and all that." "Karren, I have my own driveway to clear, and then I promised my buddy Tom I would help him with his. I do not really have time to add yours to the list." Her expression went from fake pleasant to ice cold in about half a second. "I see. So you are going to be difficult about this." "I am not being difficult. I am just not volunteering to do extra work for free." "For free?" she laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Derek, I volunteer countless hours as HOA president. I do not get paid for that. This is called being a good neighbor. Maybe you should look into it." "Being a good neighbor works both ways," I said. "And so far, all I have gotten from you is complaints. Last month it was about my trash cans being visible from the street for more than an hour. The month before that, you said my holiday lights were too bright." "I am running out of patience here, Karren." Her eyes narrowed to slits. Those were legitimate complaints based on HOA bylaws that you agreed to when you purchased your home. If you cannot follow simple rules, maybe you should not have moved to Pinewood Estates. And plowing your driveway is not in those bylaws, I countered. So I guess we are done here. I turned back to my truck, but Karren was not finished. Fine, she spat, but I will be watching you like a hawk. And if I see even one snowflake pushed onto my property, you will be getting a fine so fast it will make your head spin. She stomped back toward her house, and I shook my head. This was going to be a long winter. I climbed into my truck and started the engine, letting it warm up for a few minutes while I mentally mapped out how I was going to handle the driveway. My property was a standard suburban lot, maybe a quarter acre, with a two-car driveway that ran from the street up to my garage. The previous owner had done some landscaping that meant the natural slope of the land went from my property toward Karren's. It was not dramatic, but it was enough that if I was not careful, some snow could definitely end up on her side. The thing was, I am actually pretty good with the plow. I had been helping my dad clear driveways since I was 16 years old, back in Rochester, Minnesota, where I grew up. I knew how to angle the blade, how to use the contours of the land, how to make neat piles that stayed where I put them. Karren's concern was not really about me being sloppy. It was about her need to control everything around her. I put the truck in gear and started on my first pass. The blade cut through the snow like butter, and I pushed it to the right side of my driveway, well away from Karren's property. I made 3 more passes, working methodically, and within 20 minutes my driveway was clear. I had created a neat pile of snow along the fence line on the opposite side from Karren's house, exactly where it was supposed to be. Then I glanced over at her house and saw her standing in her front window, watching me with her arms crossed. Even from this distance, I could feel her judgmental stare. Something in me snapped. Look, I am generally a reasonable guy. I pay my taxes, I follow the rules, I try to be a good neighbor. But there is only so much a man can take, and Karren Braddock had been pushing my buttons since the day I moved in. The garbage can thing. I had brought them in 20 minutes late because I got caught in traffic coming home from work. The holiday lights. They were the exact same lights as the ones my neighbor on the other side had up, but she did not get a complaint. It was personal, and I was sick of it. I repositioned my truck at the end of my driveway, angled the blade slightly, and made one more pass. This time, I pushed a solid pile of snow directly onto the property line, right where it would naturally slide down the slope toward Karren's driveway. Physics took over from there, and a nice white cascade of snow slid right down, covering the bottom third of her pristine, still unplowed driveway. I did not even try to hide my grin. Karren burst out of her front door like she had been shot from a cannon. "What do you think you are doing?" she shrieked. "That is my property. You deliberately pushed snow onto my property." I rolled down my window. "Sorry, Karren. I guess I am just a man who gets too excited with his big truck and equipment. You know how we are." Her face turned so red I thought she might actually explode. "You did that on purpose." "Prove it," I said, and then I put the truck in gear and headed toward Tom's house, leaving her standing in her yard, shaking with rage. I probably should have known that would not be the end of it. Tom lived 3 streets over, and when I got there, he was already outside with 2 cups of coffee waiting. Tom Hendricks had been my best friend since I moved to Duluth. He worked as a physical therapist at the local hospital, and he was the one who had actually told me about the house for sale in Pinewood Estates. I had not held it against him, even after I met Karren. "I saw your handiwork on your security camera feed," Tom said, handing me a coffee with a grin. "Very subtle." "She had it coming," I said, taking a sip. The coffee was hot and strong, exactly what I needed. "Oh, I agree completely. But you know she is going to retaliate, right? Karren does not let things go." "Let her try," I said. "What is she going to do, fine me?" "She has already tried that 3 times, and I have contested every single one of them. The HOA board is sick of hearing from both of us." Tom laughed and gestured toward his driveway. "Come on, let's get this cleared before you have to deal with whatever revenge Karren is plotting." We spent the next hour clearing Tom's driveway, and his elderly neighbor Mrs. Patterson's driveway too. Mrs. Patterson came out with hot cocoa and homemade cookies, which we gladly accepted. She was exactly the kind of neighbor everyone wanted: kind, generous, and completely unconcerned with whether your garbage cans were visible from the street. When I got back home around lunchtime, there was a notice taped to my front door. I did not even have to read it to know what it was. "Notice of violation" was printed in big red letters across the top. Karren had wasted no time. According to the notice, I was being fined $250 for deliberately depositing snow and debris onto a neighbor's property in violation of HOA Bylaws Section 7, Paragraph 3. I pulled out my phone and took several pictures of the notice, then went inside and immediately pulled up the HOA bylaws on my laptop. I had learned early on to keep a digital copy of everything related to the HOA, because Karren had a tendency to interpret things in whatever way benefited her most. Section 7, Paragraph 3 actually read, "Homeowners are responsible for maintaining their property in a manner that does not negatively impact adjacent properties. This includes, but is not limited to, ensuring that lawn care, snow removal, and exterior maintenance is conducted in a respectful manner." It was vague enough that Karren probably thought she could make it stick, but it was also vague enough that I could argue my way out of it. The snow had slid naturally based on the slope of the land. I had not dumped it directly onto her property. And honestly, if she had plowed her own driveway already, it would not have mattered anyway. I spent the next hour drafting a response to the violation notice, citing the specific language of the bylaw and explaining that I had cleared my property in accordance with all regulations. I also included several photos from my security camera showing exactly how I had cleared my driveway and how the snow had moved due to natural slope and gravity. I ended with a request that the fine be removed and a suggestion that if Karren had concerns about snow migration, she should consider plowing her own driveway in a timely manner. I printed 3 copies, one for Karren, one for the HOA board, and one for my own records. Then I hand-delivered Karren's copy, dropping it in her mailbox. I was not about to give her the satisfaction of a face-to-face confrontation where she could yell at me some more. The next morning, I woke up to find my truck had been towed. I stood in my driveway in my pajamas and winter coat, staring at the empty space where my F-250 should have been, trying to process what I was seeing. My truck was gone. My truck with the plow attachment that cost me $1,500 to install. My truck that was legally parked in my own driveway on my own property. I pulled out my phone and called the Duluth Police Department non-emergency line. The dispatcher told me that yes, my truck had been towed at the request of the Homeowners Association for being in violation of parking regulations. "What parking regulations?" I demanded. "It was in my own driveway." "I do not have those details, sir." "You will need to contact the towing company to retrieve your vehicle. The number is Johnson's Towing, and they are located on Industrial Boulevard." I hung up and immediately called Johnson's Towing. A bored-sounding woman told me that my truck had been towed at 6:00 a.m. and that I would need to pay $450 to get it back, plus $100 per day storage fee if I did not pick it up within 24 hours. "This is insane," I said. "The HOA cannot just tow someone's vehicle from their own property." "Take it up with them, sir. We were called, we towed. You want your truck, you pay the fees." I got dressed and drove my old Honda Civic to the towing company, fuming the entire way. This was escalating way beyond some petty neighborhood dispute. Karren was actively costing me money now, and I was going to make sure she paid for it. At the towing lot, I had to wait 30 minutes just to talk to someone, and then another 20 minutes while they processed my payment. By the time I finally got my truck back, I had lost my entire morning and $450 that I definitely did not have in my budget. I drove straight to Tom's house. He took one look at my face and said, "What did she do now?" I told him everything. Tom listened, shaking his head in disbelief. "Derek, you need to sue her. This is harassment. She cannot just tow people's vehicles because she is mad about snow." "I am not sure I can afford a lawyer," I admitted. "I just dropped almost $500 on towing fees." "Then we go to the HOA board directly," Tom said. "There are 5 members, right? Karren is the president, but she does not have unilateral power. We make them see that she is abusing her position." He had a point. The HOA board consisted of Karren as president, plus 4 other members: Robert Martinez, who ran a local insurance agency; Patricia Choi, a retired school teacher; David Kemper, who worked from home as a software developer; and Linda Morrison, who was a nurse at the same hospital where Tom worked. "Linda is reasonable," Tom said. "I have worked with her for years, and I have met Robert a few times at neighborhood events. He seems like a straight shooter. If we can get them to see what Karren is doing, they can override her." "The next HOA board meeting is not for 3 weeks, I said, checking the calendar on my phone. "Then we call an emergency meeting. According to the bylaws, any homeowner can request an emergency meeting if they have a legitimate grievance. I will back you up." We spent the rest of the afternoon drafting a formal complaint against Karren. I documented everything: the violation notice, the towing, the fines, and the pattern of harassment that had been going on since I moved in. Tom helped me organize it all into a clear, professional presentation that would be hard for the board to ignore. That evening, I submitted the formal complaint via email to all 5 board members, requesting an emergency meeting within 7 days to address abuse of power and harassment by the HOA president. Karren responded within an hour. Her email was curt and condescending. "Your complaint has been received and will be addressed at the next regularly scheduled board meeting. Emergency meetings are reserved for actual emergencies, not for homeowners who cannot accept responsibility for their violations." But 20 minutes after that, I got an email from Robert Martinez. "Derek, I have reviewed your complaint and I believe it warrants immediate attention. I am calling for an emergency board meeting this Friday at 7:00 p.m. at the community center. All board members are expected to attend." I felt a small surge of triumph. At least someone on the board was reasonable. Friday could not come fast enough. In the meantime, I made sure to document absolutely everything. I checked my security cameras daily. I kept copies of every email, and I even started a log of every time I saw Karren watching me from her window, which turned out to be a lot. On Wednesday, I got another violation notice. This time, Karren claimed my grass was visible above the snow line in my front yard, which violated the aesthetic standards outlined in the bylaws. The fine was another $250. I did not even bother responding. I just added it to my growing pile of evidence. Thursday morning, I woke up to find that someone had shoveled all the snow from the sidewalk in front of Karen's house directly into a pile blocking my mailbox. My Ring camera had caught her husband, Gary, doing it at 5:30 a.m. Gary was a quiet guy who worked as an accountant and generally seemed like he would rather be anywhere else than in the middle of his wife's HOA drama. In the video, he kept looking around nervously, like he knew what he was doing was wrong but did not have the spine to stand up to Karen. I saved the video and added it to my evidence folder. Friday evening arrived, and I showed up to the community center 30 minutes early. Tom came with me for moral support, even though he was not directly involved in the complaint. The community center was a modest building at the entrance to Pinewood Estates, with a main room that could hold about 50 people, a small kitchen, and a couple of offices that the HOA used for storage. Robert Martinez was already there, setting up chairs and a folding table at the front of the room. He was in his 50s with graying hair and a solid handshake. "Derek, thanks for coming. I want you to know that the board takes your complaint seriously." "I appreciate that, Robert. I really do." Patricia Choi arrived next, a small Korean woman with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. She nodded at me politely but did not say much. David Kemper came in a few minutes later, looking like he had just rolled out of bed, which was probably accurate since he worked from home and kept odd hours. Linda Morrison arrived with Tom, and they were chatting about a patient they had both worked with recently. Karen was the last to arrive, and she brought her lawyer. I should have seen that coming. The lawyer was a woman in her 40s, dressed in an expensive suit, carrying a leather briefcase. She introduced herself as Margaret Sullivan from Sullivan and Associates, and she made it very clear that she was there to ensure the proceedings remained professional and legally sound. Robert looked surprised but handled it smoothly. "Miss Sullivan, this is an internal HOA matter. I am not sure legal representation is necessary. Mrs. Braddock has every right to have counsel present if she feels it is warranted," Margaret said coolly. "Surely no one here objects to following proper procedures." I could see where this was going. Karen was trying to intimidate me to make me feel like I was out of my depth. But I had dealt with lawyers during my divorce. I was not as easily intimidated as she probably hoped. "That is fine," I said. "I have nothing to hide." We all took our seats. Robert called the meeting to order and asked me to present my complaint. I had prepared a printed packet for each board member, with copies of all my documentation organized chronologically. I walked them through everything, keeping my tone calm and factual. The violation notices, the towing, the pattern of harassment, the video of Gary blocking my mailbox. I even included testimonials from other neighbors who had dealt with Karen's overreach, though most of them had asked to remain anonymous for fear of retaliation. When I finished, Robert looked at Karen. "Mrs. Braddock, would you like to respond?" Karen stood up, smoothing her blazer. "This entire complaint is absurd. Mr. Kline moved into this neighborhood 6 months ago and has done nothing but cause problems. He violates HOA rules repeatedly, and when he is held accountable, he cries harassment. I am the HOA president, and it is my job to enforce the rules. That is exactly what I have been doing." "What about the towing?" Linda Morrison asked. "His truck was legally parked in his own driveway." "What rule did that violate?" Karen did not miss a beat. Section 12, Paragraph 5 states that commercial vehicles may not be parked in residential driveways overnight. Mr. Kline's truck has commercial equipment attached to it. The plow blade qualifies it as a commercial vehicle. I nearly laughed out loud. That is the most ridiculous interpretation I have ever heard. My truck is registered as a personal vehicle. The plow attachment is removable. By that logic, Anyone with a trailer hitch or a ski rack would be in violation. Margaret, the lawyer, spoke up. The bylaws clearly state commercial vehicles. The interpretation of what constitutes a commercial vehicle is at the discretion of the HOA board. Actually, no, David Kemper said, speaking up for the first time. He had his laptop open in front of him. I am looking at the bylaws right now, and Section 12, Paragraph 5 specifically defines commercial vehicles as those used primarily for business purposes, with commercial plates, or displaying commercial signage. Derek's truck meets none of those criteria. Karen's face was turning red again. The spirit of the rule is to keep the neighborhood looking residential, not like some kind of industrial park. The spirit of the rule does not give you the right to tow someone's legally parked vehicle, Patricia Choi said sharply. And even if it did, you should have issued a warning first, not gone straight to towing. I have issued Mr. Kline multiple warnings about multiple violations, Karren insisted. He ignores them. I contest them, I corrected. That is not the same thing. And you have not provided any evidence that I actually violated the rules you claim I violated. Robert held up a hand. Let us take this one issue at a time. First, the towing. Karren, did you authorize the towing of Mr. Kline's truck? Yes. As HOA president, I have the authority to enforce violations. Did you consult with the rest of the board before doing so? Karren hesitated. It was early in the morning. I could not reach everyone. So no, Robert said. According to our own bylaws, towing a vehicle from a resident's private property requires board approval except in cases of emergency or clear safety violations. This was neither. You overstepped your authority. Margaret jumped in. Mrs. Braddock was acting in good faith to enforce what she believed was a violation. Good faith does not cover the cost of towing fees, Linda said. Derek, how much did you have to pay? $450. Linda looked at Robert. I move that the HOA reimburse Derek for the towing fees since the towing was not properly authorized. Seconded, David said immediately. Robert called for a vote. Linda, David, and Patricia all voted in favor. Robert abstained as the meeting chair. Karren, of course, voted against. The motion passed 3-1. I felt a wave of relief. At least I would get my money back, but Robert was not done. Now let us address the broader issue of harassment. Derek has documented a pattern of violations that seem to be targeted specifically at him, while similar situations with other residents have gone unaddressed. Karren, can you explain this? I enforce the rules fairly across the entire neighborhood, Karren said stiffly. Then why did you fine Derek for his holiday lights being too bright, but not James Morrison 2 doors down who had the exact same lights? Patricia asked. Karren sputtered for a moment. I must have missed James's lights. They were right next to each other, Patricia pressed. I find it hard to believe you noticed one but not the other. This went on for another 45 minutes, with the board members picking apart Karren's enforcement record and finding inconsistency after inconsistency. Margaret tried to defend her, but it was clear even she was having trouble making Karren's actions seem reasonable. Finally, Robert said, I think we have heard enough. I am going to make a recommendation to the board. First, Derek's fines should be voided, all of them. Second, Karren needs to step back from day-to-day enforcement decisions. Going forward, any violation notices or fines must be approved by at least 2 board members before being issued. Third, we need to review our towing policy to make sure this never happens again. I agree completely, Linda said. Seconded, David added. Patricia nodded. I also think we need to implement a formal appeals process for violations. Right now, it is too easy for one person to abuse the system. Karren looked like she wanted to argue, but Margaret put a hand on her arm and whispered something to her. Karren pressed her lips into a thin line but stayed silent. The board voted on Robert's recommendations, and they passed 4-1, with only Karren voting against. As we were wrapping up, Robert looked directly at Karren. "Karren, you have done a lot for this community over the years, but I think it is time to let others step up and help. You have been carrying this burden alone for too long, and I think it is affecting your judgment. Please take some time to think about whether you want to continue in this role." Karren stood up abruptly. "I have devoted years of my life to this neighborhood, and this is the thanks I get, being told I am the problem." "No one is saying you are the problem," Robert said calmly. "We are saying that the current system is not working and we need to make changes." Karren grabbed her purse and stormed out, with Margaret following close behind. After they left, Robert turned to me. "Derek, I apologize for what you have been through. This should never have happened." "I appreciate you all taking this seriously," I said. "Honestly, I just want to live in peace." "That is what we all want," Linda said with a smile, "and hopefully we can get back to that now." I left the meeting feeling lighter than I had in months. Tom clapped me on the back as we walked to our cars. "You handled that perfectly. I think you actually might have won." "We will see," I said. "Karren does not strike me as someone who gives up easily." I was right. The following Tuesday, I came home from work to find a letter from Sullivan and Associates in my mailbox. It was a cease and desist, demanding that I stop making defamatory statements about Karren Braddock and threatening legal action if I did not comply. I read it twice, trying to figure out what they were talking about. I had not said anything about Karren to anyone except the HOA board, and everything I had said was documented and true. Then, I saw the date at the bottom of the letter. It had been drafted before the emergency meeting, which meant Karren had been planning to intimidate me into backing down. I took a picture of the letter and sent it to Robert with a note. "Thought you should see this." He called me 10 minutes later. "This is unacceptable. Karren is using intimidation tactics to avoid accountability. I am calling another board meeting for this weekend. Robert, I do not want to take up all the board's time with this. You are not taking up our time, Karren is, and we need to address it now before it gets worse." That Saturday, the board met again, this time without Karren. Margaret Sullivan was not there either. Robert explained that he had asked Karren not to attend while they discussed her conduct, since it was a conflict of interest for her to be part of the conversation. The meeting was much shorter this time. Robert showed the cease and desist letter to the other board members, and their reactions ranged from angry to appalled. "This is legal harassment," Patricia said flatly. "She is trying to silence Derek for exercising his rights as a homeowner." "I move that we ask for Karren's resignation as HOA president," David said. "This has gone too far." Linda seconded the motion immediately. They voted unanimously in favor. Robert called Karren that evening to inform her of the board's decision. I was not there for that conversation, but Tom heard about it through Linda. Apparently, Karren had screamed so loud that Robert had to hold the phone away from his ear. She refused to resign and threatened to sue the entire board. The next few weeks were tense. Karren did not resign, but she also was not showing up to board meetings or answering emails. The other board members essentially took over her duties, which the neighborhood ran much more smoothly without her constant interference. Then, in early February, things took a turn I did not expect. I was at home on a Sunday afternoon when I heard sirens outside. I looked out my window and saw 2 Duluth Police Department cruisers parked in front of Karren's house. My first thought was that maybe there had been a medical emergency with Gary, but then I saw officers walking around the property, taking pictures and measurements. Tom called me an hour later with the full story. It turned out that one of the neighbors, an elderly man named Frank Paulson who lived on the other side of Karren, had filed a police report against her. Frank was 82 years old and lived alone after his wife passed away. He had a son who visited once a month to help with things around the house. According to Frank's report, Karren had been systematically harassing him for over a year. She had issued dozens of violation notices for everything from his grass being a quarter-inch too long to his mailbox being unsightly. She had fined him thousands of dollars, which he had been paying because he did not know he could contest them. When he finally told his son what was happening, his son contacted a lawyer. The lawyer discovered that Karren had been pocketing the fine money instead of depositing it into the HOA's account. She had created a separate bank account under her name and had been treating HOA fines as her personal income. Over the course of 7 years, she had embezzled more than $60,000. The police were investigating it as theft and fraud. I sat down hard on my couch when Tom told me. I had thought Karren was just a power-hungry control freak. I had not realized she was an actual criminal. The next few months were a whirlwind. Karren was arrested and charged with multiple counts of theft by fraud and embezzlement. Gary filed for divorce almost immediately, claiming he had no knowledge of what Karren had been doing. The HOA hired a forensic accountant to go through the books, and they discovered the scheme went back even further than 7 years. Karren had been embezzling since she first became president. The local news picked up the story, and suddenly Pinewood Estates was famous for all the wrong reasons. Reporters showed up at board meetings. Neighbors were interviewed. Someone even created a Facebook group called HOA Horror Stories, where people shared their own experiences with overzealous HOA boards. In April, Karren took a plea deal. She pleaded guilty to 5 counts of theft and was sentenced to 3 years in prison, with the possibility of parole after 18 months. She was also ordered to pay full restitution to the HOA and to Frank Paulson specifically. Robert Martinez was elected as the new HOA president in a special election. His first act was to implement a complete overhaul of the HOA's policies, including term limits for board members, mandatory audits every year, and a transparent appeals process for violations. As for me, I finally got to enjoy my house in peace. The snow melted, spring arrived, and I spent my weekends working in my yard without worrying about Karren measuring my grass with a ruler. One Saturday in May, I was outside washing my truck when Frank Paulson walked over from his house. He moved slowly with a cane, but his eyes were bright and alert. "Derek," he said, shaking my hand. "I wanted to thank you." "For what?" I asked, surprised. "If you had not stood up to Karren at that board meeting, I never would have found the courage to report what she was doing to me. My son told me about your complaint, and it made me realize I was not the only one. You started something important." I felt a lump in my throat. "I am just glad you got justice, Frank. What she did to you was terrible." "It was," he agreed, "but it is over now. And I got most of my money back, thanks to the restitution order. I am going to use some of it to take my son and his family on a vacation this summer. First time in years." "That sounds wonderful," I said sincerely. After Frank left, I stood in my driveway for a while, just looking at the neighborhood. It really was a nice place to live, now that the constant threat of arbitrary fines and harassment was gone. The trees were budding, flowers were blooming in yards, and kids were riding bikes up and down the street. Tom pulled up in his car and got out with a 12-pack of beer. "Thought we could celebrate the end of the Karren era," he said with a grin. "Best idea I have heard all week," I said. We sat on my back deck as the sun set, talking about everything and nothing. At one point, Tom raised his beer. Here is to standing up to bullies, even when they have a title and think they have all the power. I will drink to that, I said, clinking my bottle against his. Later that night, after Tom went home, I checked my email and found a message from Robert. The subject line read, "Thank you." The email was short. "Derek, I wanted to let you know that the HOA board voted tonight to officially apologize to you for everything you went through with Karren. We are also reimbursing you for all the fines you paid before the board voided them. The check will be in the mail next week. More importantly, I want to thank you for having the courage to speak up. A lot of people in this neighborhood were suffering in silence, and your willingness to fight back made it possible for them to come forward too. You made Pinewood Estates a better place to live. Thank you." I read the email 3 times, feeling a mix of vindication and relief. It had been a long, frustrating battle, but it had been worth it. The check arrived the following Tuesday. It was for $700, covering the 2 fines I had paid before contesting the others, plus the cost of the towing fees that had been reimbursed. I deposited it, and then did something I had been wanting to do for months. I hired a landscaping company to completely redo my front yard. New flower beds, a stone pathway, and professional-grade lawn care. If I was going to live in this neighborhood, I was going to enjoy it properly. As summer rolled on, life in Pinewood Estates settled into a comfortable rhythm. Robert turned out to be an excellent HOA president, focused on maintaining property values and community standards without being a tyrant about it. Violation notices were rare and always came with a friendly warning first. The annual HOA meeting in June was actually pleasant, with people volunteering for committees and brainstorming ideas for neighborhood events. In July, we organized a block party. It was the first one Pinewood Estates had done in years, and it was a huge success. Someone rented a bounce house for the kids. We had a potluck with tables full of food. Someone else set up a sound system and played music. Frank Paulson showed up with his son and grandkids, and I watched him laugh more in one afternoon than I had probably seen in the entire time I had known him. At one point during the party, Patricia Choi came over to me with a plate of Korean barbecue. "You should run for the board," she said without preamble. I nearly choked on my burger. "What? The board?" she repeated. "We have an opening since Karren is obviously not coming back, and I think you would be good at it. You understand the bylaws, you are fair-minded, and people trust you." "Patricia, I barely survived dealing with the HOA as a regular homeowner. I do not know if I want to be on the other side of it," she shrugged. "Think about it. The election is not until November, but I am serious. We need people like you who will do the job for the right reasons." I promised I would think about it, though I was not sure I meant it. In August, I got word through Tom that Karren's husband Gary had sold their house and moved to Wisconsin to be closer to his brother. The house sold fast, and the new owners were a young couple with a toddler. They introduced themselves to everyone on the street and seemed genuinely excited to be part of the community. It was a relief to have normal, friendly neighbors instead of Karren's constant surveillance and criticism. The trial had been covered extensively in the local news, and the full scope of Karren's embezzlement became public knowledge. She had been stealing HOA funds for almost a decade, using the money to fund her lifestyle. Expensive clothes, luxury vacations, even a boat that Gary claimed he never knew about. The forensic accountant estimated she had stolen close to $85,000 total, not the $60,000 they initially thought. What really got to me was reading the victim impact statements that came out during sentencing. There were 11 other homeowners besides Frank, who had been systematically harassed and financially exploited by Karren. One couple had nearly lost their home because they could not keep up with the fines Karren was levying against them. Another single mother had gone into debt-paying violations that turned out to be completely fabricated. The judge had not been sympathetic. In his sentencing remarks, he said that Karren had violated the trust of her community in the most egregious way possible, and that her actions had caused real harm to vulnerable people. The 3-year sentence was actually on the harsher end of what she could have received, and I was glad for it. By September, I found myself actually considering Patricia's suggestion about running for the board. I mentioned it to Tom one evening while we were watching a Vikings game at his place. "You should do it," he said immediately. "You would be great at it." "I do not know. It is a lot of responsibility and I already work full-time." "Yeah, but think about it this way. You have already seen the worst that the HOA can be. You know exactly what not to do and you care about this neighborhood. I have seen how you help people. You plowed Mrs. Patterson's driveway all winter without being asked. You helped Frank with his yard work after Karren was arrested. You are already doing the work of being a good neighbor. Being on the board would just make it official." He had a point. I submitted my name for the November election at the end of September. There were 2 other candidates, a woman named Rachel Torres who worked as a real estate agent, and a man named Jeff Simmons who was retired military. Both seemed like decent people, and I figured whoever won would probably do a good job. The election was held at the November HOA meeting. Each candidate gave a short speech about why they wanted to serve on the board. Rachel talked about her experience in real estate and her understanding of property values. Jeff talked about his leadership experience and his commitment to rules and order. When it was my turn, I kept it simple. "6 months ago, I almost left this neighborhood," I said, looking around at the 50 or so people gathered in the community center. "I was tired of fighting, tired of being harassed, tired of feeling like I could not just live in my own home without constantly looking over my shoulder. But then I realized that this neighborhood is worth fighting for. Not fighting against each other, but fighting for the kind of community we all want to live in. A place where the rules are fair and applied equally. A place where people help each other instead of looking for reasons to tear each other down. That is the kind of neighborhood I want to be part of, and that is why I am running for the board." The vote was close, but I won by a narrow margin. Robert shook my hand and welcomed me to the board officially, and I felt a strange mix of pride and nervousness. I had spent so much energy fighting against the HOA that it felt surreal to now be part of it. My first board meeting as an official member was in early December. We discussed snow removal policies, which made me laugh given how this whole saga had started. We also talked about planning the neighborhood holiday decorations contest and organizing a winter food drive. It was boring, administrative work, but it felt good. It felt like we were actually serving the community instead of ruling over it. On a cold Saturday morning in mid-December, almost exactly a year after my confrontation with Karren over the snow plowing, I was out clearing my driveway again after a fresh snowfall. I had the same truck, the same plow blade, and I was following the same careful technique to keep the snow on my own property. Frank Paulson walked over, bundled up in a heavy coat and scarf. "Need any help?" he asked with a grin. "I think I've got it under control," I said. "But I was planning to do your driveway next if that is okay." "I would appreciate that," Frank said. "Though I can pay you this time. Got my restitution money, remember?" "Frank, I am not taking your money. We are neighbors. This is what neighbors do." He nodded, his eyes a little misty. "You are a good man, Derek Kline." After I finished both driveways, I sat in my truck for a minute just watching the neighborhood wake up. Smoke curled from chimneys. Christmas lights twinkled on houses. A couple of kids were already out building a snowman in their front yard. It was peaceful. It was exactly what I had hoped for when I bought this house. My phone buzzed with a text from Tom. "Board meeting still on for Wednesday," I texted back. "Yep, 7 p.m. Do not be late." Then I drove over to Mrs. Patterson's house to clear her driveway too, because that is what you do when you are part of a real community. You help people. You look out for each other. You do not measure grass with rulers or tow trucks from driveways or embezzle money from your neighbors. You just be decent. That night, I got an email from the Minnesota Department of Corrections. Karren Braddock had been officially transferred to the Minnesota Correctional Facility in Shakopee to begin serving her sentence. The email was just a notification, something they sent to victims and involved parties, but it felt like closure. I forwarded it to Frank with a short message. "Thought you would want to know." He replied 10 minutes later. "Good riddance. Now let us all move forward." That was exactly what we did. Over the next few months, serving on the HOA board became a regular part of my life. We met once a month, handled the occasional complaint or maintenance issue, and generally tried to keep the neighborhood running smoothly. It was nothing like the drama of the Karren era. It was just normal, boring community management, which was exactly how it should be. In February, we organized a community meeting to discuss updates to the bylaws. We simplified a lot of the language, removed outdated rules that no longer made sense, and added clear definitions for things that had been vague before. The meeting was well attended, and people actually seemed engaged and interested rather than fearful or angry. One of the biggest changes we made was to the violation and fine system. We created a 3-tier warning system. First, a friendly notice, then a formal warning if the issue was not addressed, and only then a fine if the problem persisted. We also capped fines at $100 maximum and required board approval for anything beyond that. It was a system designed to help people comply rather than punish them for minor infractions. In March, I ran into Gary, Karren's ex-husband, at a grocery store in downtown Duluth. He was with a woman I did not recognize, and they were laughing about something as they pushed their cart down the aisle. When he saw me, his expression changed to something uncomfortable. "Derek," he said, stopping his cart, "I did not expect to see you here." "Gary," I replied neutrally. "How are you doing?" "I am okay. Better, actually." He gestured to the woman next to him. "This is Amanda. We have been dating for a few months." "Nice to meet you," I said to Amanda, who smiled warmly. Gary cleared his throat. "Look, I want to apologize for everything that happened." I knew Karren was intense about the HOA stuff, but I had no idea she was stealing money. I should have paid more attention. I should have stopped her. "You are not the one doing it, Gary. You do not need to apologize to me." "I know, but still." She made a lot of people miserable, and I just went along with it because it was easier than fighting with her. That makes me complicit, even if I did not know the full extent. I appreciated his honesty. "For what it is worth, I think you are doing the right thing now. Moving on, starting over." He nodded. "I am trying. Wisconsin has been good for me. Fresh start, you know." We talked for a few more minutes and then parted ways. As I finished my shopping, I thought about how many lives Karren had affected with her need for control and power. Gary was just one more casualty in a way. He had spent years married to someone who turned out to be a criminal, and now he was trying to rebuild. In April, Frank Paulson invited me over for dinner with his son and grandkids. His son, Martin, thanked me multiple times for helping his dad stand up to Karren. "He was so stressed before," Martin said. I could see it wearing him down, but he did not want to burden me with it. If you had not opened the door by filing your own complaint, I do not think he ever would have come forward. Your dad is tough, I said. He survived a lot more than HOA harassment in his lifetime, Frank laughed. Korean War veteran, worked 40 years as a machinist, raised 3 kids. Yeah, I have been through some things. But there is something particularly cruel about being harassed in your own home, in your own neighborhood, by someone who is supposed to be looking out for the community. That kind of betrayal is different. I understood exactly what he meant. As spring turned to summer, Pinewood Estates continued to thrive. Property values actually went up after the Karren situation was resolved, partly because the news coverage had eventually turned positive, focusing on how the neighborhood had cleaned house and implemented reforms. Real estate agents started marketing homes in Pinewood Estates as having one of the most transparent and fair HOAs in the region. In June, we had our second annual block party, even bigger than the first. We closed off an entire street, had food trucks come in, and hired a local band to play. There was a dunk tank, a pie-eating contest, and a raffle with prizes donated by local businesses. It felt like a real community celebration, the kind of thing that makes you remember why you chose to live somewhere. I was manning the grill, flipping burgers and hot dogs when Robert came over with a beer for me. "You have done good work on the board," he said. "I am glad you decided to run." "Thanks, Robert. I am glad you talked me into it." "I did not talk you into anything. You chose to step up." "That is all you." As the sun set and the party wound down, I looked around at my neighbors laughing and talking, kids running around with glow sticks, and I felt genuinely content. This was what it was supposed to be about, not rules and fines and power trips. Just people living together, looking out for each other, building something good. In July, I got a letter forwarded from the Minnesota Department of Corrections. It was from Karren. My first instinct was to throw it away without reading it, but curiosity got the better of me. The letter was handwritten, 3 pages long. In it, Karren tried to explain herself. She talked about feeling underappreciated and overwhelmed. She said the HOA president position had consumed her life, and she had felt like no one understood how hard she was working. The money, she claimed, had started as just borrowing small amounts when the HOA account was low and she needed to pay for something out of pocket. Then it became a habit, and then it became something she felt entitled to. She never quite apologized, not really. It was more of an explanation, a justification. She ended the letter by saying she hoped I could understand why she had acted the way she did, and that maybe someday the neighborhood would remember the good things she had done instead of just her mistakes. I read it twice, then filed it away with all my other documentation. I did not respond. There was nothing to say. Understanding why someone did something terrible did not make it less terrible. In August, the HOA received a formal notice that Karren had been approved for early release in 6 months, contingent on good behavior and completion of a financial management course in prison. There was some grumbling in the neighborhood about it being too soon, but there was not anything anyone could do. The justice system had run its course. I focused on the present instead of worrying about Karren's future. The board had hired a new property management company to handle day-to-day operations, which freed us up to focus on bigger picture planning. We started discussing a playground renovation project and looking into solar panels for the community center. In September, I celebrated my 2nd anniversary of living in Pinewood Estates. Tom threw me a small party, inviting some of our mutual friends. As we sat around a fire pit in my backyard, someone asked me if I ever regretted moving to a neighborhood with an HOA. A year ago, I would have said yes, I admitted. But now, no, I think HOAs can be good when they are run properly. It is just like anything else. Power corrupts if there are not checks and balances. But when you have good people trying to serve the community instead of control it, it works. That is very diplomatic of you, Tom said with a grin. Spoken like a true board member. Everyone laughed, and the conversation moved on to other topics. In October, we held elections for board positions again. I ran unopposed for my seat, which I took as a good sign. Robert stepped down as president, saying he wanted to spend more time with his family, and Patricia Choi was elected as the new president. She asked me to serve as vice president, which I accepted. In November, as winter started to settle in again, I found myself preparing for snow season with none of the dread I had felt the year before. I checked my plow blade, made sure my truck was in good shape, and even offered to coordinate a neighborhood snow removal volunteer group for elderly residents who could not clear their own driveways. 10 people signed up to help, including some of the newer residents who had moved in over the summer. It felt good to see that spirit of community spreading. The first big snow came in late November, just before Thanksgiving. I woke up early and spent 3 hours clearing driveways for myself, Frank, Mrs. Patterson, and 2 other elderly residents. Tom joined me with his own plow truck, and we made quick work of it. As I was finishing up, a car pulled up to the curb near my house. A woman got out, someone I did not recognize. She was younger, maybe early 30s, with Karren's same blonde hair but a much softer expression. "Are you Derek Kline?" she asked as she approached. "I am," I said cautiously. "I am Jennifer, Karren Braddock's daughter. I was hoping I could talk to you for a few minutes." I was surprised, but I agreed. We sat in my truck with the heat running while she explained why she was there. "My mom is getting out in February," Jennifer said, "and I wanted to come talk to some of the people she hurt before she does. She does not know I am doing this. I just needed to do it for myself." "Okay," I said, not sure where this was going. "I grew up in this neighborhood," Jennifer continued. "I lived here until I was 18, and then I could not wait to leave. My mom was always so controlling, so obsessed with everything being perfect. It drove my dad crazy, it drove me crazy, and apparently it drove her crazy too. I am not here to make excuses for her. What she did was wrong. But I wanted you to know that there were good parts of her too, and I think she lost sight of them somewhere along the way." "I appreciate you telling me that," I said, "but I am not sure what you want from me." "Nothing," Jennifer said quickly. "I do not want anything. I just wanted to meet you because my mom talked about you in her letters. She was obsessed with you, actually. I think you represented everything she felt like she was losing control of, and when you stood up to her, it broke something in her. I did not mean to break anything. I just wanted to live in peace. I know, and you deserve that. Everyone does." Jennifer looked out the window at the snow-covered street. "When my mom gets out, she is not coming back here. She is moving to Arizona to live with my aunt. So you do not have to worry about her showing up or causing more problems. I just wanted you to know that. Thank you for telling me." Jennifer handed me a piece of paper with an email address written on it. "If you ever want to talk, or if you have questions, you can reach me here. I know my mom owes you an apology, a real one. I do not know if she will ever be capable of giving it, but I wanted to at least acknowledge what happened." After she left, I sat in my truck for a while, processing the conversation. It was strange to think of Karren as a real person with a family, with a daughter who was trying to make sense of what her mother had done. It was easier when she was just the villain of the story, the HOA tyrant who got what she deserved. But life is more complicated than that. Thanksgiving came and went. The neighborhood was quiet and peaceful. Christmas decorations went up without any violation notices or fines. The holiday lights contest we organized was friendly and fun, with no drama. In January, I got a notification that my term on the HOA board had officially been extended for another year. Patricia was doing a great job as president, and working with her was easy. We had the same philosophy about community management. Keep it simple, be fair, and remember that we were all neighbors first. February arrived, and with it came the news that Karren had been released from prison. Jennifer had been right. Karren moved to Arizona immediately and did not return to Minnesota. I heard through the grapevine that she was working at a grocery store and living quietly with her sister. Part of me felt relieved that she was gone. Another part of me felt something like sadness. Not for her exactly, but for the waste of it all. She could have been a good HOA president. She could have actually served the community and made a difference. Instead, she let her need for control turn into something toxic and criminal. In March, on a particularly mild day when the snow was finally starting to melt, I was outside raking up winter debris from my yard. Frank came over with his grandson, a kid of about 10, who wanted to ask me about my truck. "Is that the truck you used to plow all the snow?" The kid asked, pointing at my F-250. "It is," I said. "Grandpa said you got in trouble because you pushed snow toward a mean lady's house." I glanced at Frank, who was trying not to laugh. "Something like that." "Were you scared of her?" "A little bit," I admitted. But sometimes you have to stand up to people even when you are scared. Otherwise, they keep pushing you around. The kid thought about that for a moment. "I think you were brave." "Thanks, buddy. That means a lot." After they left, I stood in my yard for a while, looking at the house that had caused me so much stress and anxiety when I first moved in. Now it was just a house, a place I lived, a part of a neighborhood that I cared about. Life had moved on. The neighborhood had moved on. Even Karren, in her own way, had moved on. As spring fully arrived and the last of the snow melted away, I found myself thinking about everything that had happened over the past 2 years. The fights, the stress, the legal drama, and eventually the resolution. It had been exhausting, but it had also taught me something important. Communities are fragile things. They require work and attention and good faith from everyone involved. When one person abuses that trust, it can poison everything. But when people are willing to stand up and fight for what is right, things can heal. Pinewood Estates was proof of that. In April, we broke ground on the new playground. Half the neighborhood showed up to help, including kids who were excited to see what it would become. We worked together, digging and building and laughing, and it felt like the final chapter of the Karren era closing. By the time summer arrived, the playground was finished. It had swings and slides and climbing structures, all built with volunteer labor and funded by HOA dues that were now being used properly. We had a ribbon-cutting ceremony, and Patricia gave a speech about community and working together. I stood at the back of the crowd, watching kids already playing on the new equipment, and I felt a deep sense of satisfaction. This was what it was all about. Not rules and fines and power trips, just people building something good together. Tom came up beside me with his usual grin. "Pretty great, right?" "Yeah," I said. "It really is." "You ever think about what would have happened if you had not stood up to Karren that day with the snow?" I thought about it. Probably nothing would have changed. She would have kept stealing, kept harassing people, and eventually it would have gotten even worse. "So you are a hero," I laughed. "I would not go that far. I am just a guy who refused to plow someone's driveway for free." "Well, your refusal saved a lot of people a lot of pain." "I think that counts." Maybe it did. Or maybe it was just a reminder that sometimes the smallest acts of resistance can lead to bigger changes. Either way, I was glad I had done it. As the sun set on that perfect summer evening, with kids playing and neighbors chatting and the smell of someone's grill drifting through the air, I realized something important. I was home. Not just in the physical sense of owning a house, but in the deeper sense of belonging to a place and a community. Pinewood Estates had tested me, challenged me, and ultimately made me stronger. And in return, I had helped make it a better place to live. That was enough.